Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Baltimore. We appreciate you making the trip out here. This is sort of in our backyard, although they say it's local travel, but it didn't feel like it this morning, I'll tell you. We know that this had to take some time for you and some effort to get the approvals from your agency to be here, and of course setting aside funds from your admin budget. Okay. So thank you for doing that. The funding that goes into this event each year, last year we did regional meetings, comes out of the block grants, part of that nearly $3 million TNTA set aside. So we sincerely mean it when we say we want to hear from each of you about your feedback on the quality of this event and the other events that we do throughout the year, the webinars and that. One of our primary roles is to serve all of you and provide what guidance we can. And so if there are ways we can do that better, please let us know, however you feel comfortable sharing that feedback. There are evaluation forms for this particular event that we encourage you to fill out and submit, but also feel free to stop and talk to any of the staff and myself during the week or send us an email, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Just let us know what you think of the event and how we can do this better in the future. Next year, just as a preview, we are thinking of going back to meetings again like we did last year. So if you have thoughts on that, please let us know as well. It's so good to see many familiar faces out there and some faces I don't recognize, and I'm sure that some offices were fortunate enough to bring additional staff beyond the light heap directors. So we welcome all of you, and again, we appreciate the investment of your time and your funding for this event. And please, as you're coming in, just take a seat. Welcome. A quick preview for the agenda this week. Hopefully you all have a packet. Today is mostly geared towards covering what we thought were some key concepts in the federal expectations for administering the light heap program. It's mostly geared for newer coordinators and staff, but we always welcome all of our seasoned colleagues because we don't know it all. We want to hear from all of you and for you to share your experiences. As you'll keep hearing us say this week, this is a block grant program, which means the reins for how this program is administered is really in all of your hands, or at least within your agency's hands. And so we are here just as much to learn from you this week as you are from us, because there's so much discretion that each of you has in how you design and administer your programs. And so for us to be good providers of guidance, we need to better understand the unique nature of each of your programs so that we can help share that with all of you. So we really do encourage you throughout the week to add your comments and your feedback about how you do things in your state or with your tribe or territory, so that your colleagues can learn from all of you as well. So again, today is mostly going to be our staff. We can't touch on everything in one day, but we tried to select a few things that we thought were important for newer people to be aware of. And just, can I get a show of hands of how many people are new to the program within the last year or so? Wow. Welcome. Again, thank you for being here, and please do not hesitate to ask questions throughout the 2.5 days. And if you don't get your question asked, there will be comment and question cards that you can drop them off. And if we don't get to them this week, we'll certainly follow up after the meeting by email on that. So after today, tomorrow we're going to delve more into some more detailed hands-on work. The morning, it's going to be a long day, just forewarning, but the morning we're going to break groups up, and states are going to put their heads together about performance measures. That's going to be back in this room. And then we're going to have states and territories that don't have the new performance measures requirement right now meeting separately in a different room, which will provide you that logistics. It'll be upstairs. We'll remind you about that at the end of the day today. They're going to be meeting separately, and that's going to be a really good hands-on session where we're going to work through how you can flesh out a policy manual, and how you can look at different approaches for your payment or benefit matrix. So tomorrow morning, you're definitely going to have your thinking caps on and hopefully going home with some good tools in your pocket. Then in the afternoon, we're all going to come back here again, and we're going to have some outside speakers joining us talking about some different things that we've been trying to get involved with, particularly the Healthy Homes Work Group, which the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department has been leading. And we're also going to bring some colleagues from our agency from the Assets for Independence program to come and speak to you towards the end of the day tomorrow. If you're not familiar with that program, AFI, it's a program geared towards low-income individuals that helps them save towards a big milestone. It could be their education, buying a home, starting a business, or buying a car, and they get a match towards their savings. And so we're going to have some of our colleagues from that program come in and talk about some of the newer developments in the field of financial capability and trying to help low-income populations think more broadly than just, how do I meet this month's energy bill? And then Friday morning, we're going to wrap up talking about some of the new expectations from OMB's Uniform Administrative Guidance. And we're going to have some written guidance coming out very, very shortly about that as well. So we'll have a chance for you to ask all your questions on Friday about that. And then just wrap up with some general updates and answer any remaining questions you might have. Kind of unofficially, we've tried to make Friday afternoon available for all of our staff to be here to meet with you one-on-one or in small groups. So if you haven't reached out to your liaison or to Aka, myself, Yulia, Leon, Peter, we're going to be around, Iris, so you can schedule a time to meet with us either during the breaks today and tomorrow or on Friday afternoon to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And also, right after the close of the meeting, we're going to try to convene a focus group to talk about upcoming training and technical assistance needs. So we really want to get your feedback about kind of the longer-term picture about training needs and how we should prioritize the funding that we have to provide training and technical assistance to all of you. So if you're interested in that, just know that we'll probably start that around 12:30 on Friday. In a break room, and you're welcome to participate in that as well. So before we get started, I'm going to do this on Friday as well, but I have to thank all of the staff for their preparation for this event. For those of you who are sticking around for the NIADA meeting this weekend and the NUAC conference next week, you're going to be so sick of us by the time you leave. I just feel like we're on the agenda everywhere. But we're going to try not to repeat ourselves too much as best we can. But staff really have been working very hard on their presentations for these meetings, and I have to especially thank Yulia, if you don't mind standing up. She's been our lead analyst in putting this all together, working with our two contractors, Brilliant on the content development and Capital Consulting for the logistics. So we really want to thank everybody for their work these last few months on this event. And I'd also be amiss to not quickly introduce some of our newest staff. Many of you may recognize the gentleman sitting at the front table here, Mr. Akam Raman. We were very, very fortunate to have snatched him up from the state of Massachusetts. He was running LIHEAP and CSBG for a number of years. I won't go into how many years, but we are definitely benefiting from all of his experience, and he's just jumped in like he was always a part of us, so that has been wonderful. And he's leading our operations team, so all of the monitoring and the plan review in the fall, and a lot of the technical assistance, your one-on-one contacts with our office all fall in his area. And shall I introduce your new staff, or I'll let you introduce your new staff? No, you will introduce them later on. He's going to be talking in just a few minutes, so he'll talk about some of the operations staff that joined us. But as you know, we have Yuli here. We also have Peter in the front row, if you want to stand up for a second and wave to everybody. You might remember Peter from, he's our primary contact on our funding allocation. So he's the money man. So he doesn't have too much control on how much each of you get, but you want to be on his good side. And then somewhere we have Leon Litto joining us in the policy area. For those of you who've been around a while, you've probably talked to him on many occasions about your grantee survey, now the performance data form, and the household report. And we have Iris Curtis somewhere who is our auditor and been really rolling up her sleeves with our monitoring reviews and with audit resolution from the A133 reports. So I'm not going to talk about operations. I'll leave that to AICM. And then, of course, I can't stop here and without saying that since you're in Baltimore, I have to share what I know about Baltimore, and that is you're here at a great time. So I know you won't have that much time to do sightseeing, but where you can squeeze it in, this Friday through Sunday down in the Inner Harbor, there's going to be a great event that's very rare where they have an exact replica of a historic ship called the Hermione that was sailed by Lafayette across the Atlantic and up the East Coast way back when. And so they're actually allowing free public tours on the ship, and they're having all sorts of historic demonstrations. That's all free down in the Inner Harbor Friday through Sunday. So I encourage you to check that out if you enjoy anything to do with sailing or history. And of course, for those of you sticking around this weekend, the hotel where Nieda and Newark will be located is also along the Inner Harbor, but your catty corner to Little Italy. There are all sorts of great Italian bakeries and restaurants and cannolis and all sorts of good stuff. You have to go to Little Italy. And then there's Canton and Fells Point, all within an easy cab ride or long walk if you enjoy that. So I encourage you to get out and experience a little bit of Baltimore and enjoy your time while you're here. So with that, we will now jump into our first session, which will be AICM and I talking a little bit about grantee roles and responsibilities. So if I didn't mention it earlier, my name is Lauren Christopher, Director of the Division of Energy Assistance. And I should also mention that our Office Director for the Office of Community Services, Jeannie Chafin, really wanted to be here, but she had to choose between this or getting married this weekend. So she chose the latter. She's on her way as we speak back to Missouri and going to get married this weekend and then on her honeymoon. So we forgive her, I hope, for not being here this week and next. But she did want to extend her welcome to all of you and that she regretted not seeing you. And then, of course, AICM Rahman. And I'm going to pause here and let AICM come up and do a little welcome and intro, introduce his staff, and then we'll jump into the content. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning. How are we doing this morning? Good? Okay. So before I get to the staff introduction, I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is what Lauren and I are going to do this morning, the presentation, is basically a sneak preview of what you're going to experience in the next 3 days. Of course, it's not going to be lecturing you because you guys are seasoned people as far as LAHIP is concerned. So what the approach that Lauren and I would like to take for the next 3 days is some kind of a partnership approach where if we are wrong, please raise your hand. If you have suggestions, raise your hand, give us feedback throughout the next 3 days so that we can come up with a better training program in the future, not just the original training programs, but also we have been doing a lot of one-to-one phone calls, technical assistance, whatnot, monitoring visit. So I would like to, from the operations standpoint, I'd like to keep the communication open because it does help us and help you, help everyone. Because we can't forget that the mission of the low-income home energy assistance program, LAHIP, is to serve our mutual customers, and these are low-income households who are in dire need of assistance. As Lauren mentioned, that I was part of the Massachusetts LAHIP and CSBG program for years, and I got to see some of those clients. I was able to meet with them. I was able to look at their files. I was able to visit many sub-grantees over the last several years. And the experience that I gathered from this is that nothing is more important than serving our mutual customers. So with that, I would like to welcome you to Baltimore, and I hope that we'll have 3 very enjoyable days here. With that, I would like to first of all thank OCS for allowing us to bring in new folks to OCS, because as you know that we're in a kind of a status quo as far as staffing is concerned for several years, or at least several months before I started. So it's wonderful to bring in more folks. So with that, I would like to introduce 2 of our newest staff members first, and then I will read the list to you for the other folks who, some of them are not here today. First of all, we have Jamia Farbush. Can you stand up, Jamia? And Jamia will be responsible for working with regions 1 and 4. Welcome, Jamia. We have next Catherine Hayden, and Catherine is going to be responsible for region 5 and 3. Next is Josephine Rago Adia. I don't know if Josephine is here yet. She's on her way. Josephine, many of you know that she has been part of OCS for years, and she comes to OCS with wealth of knowledge from other federal programs and local programs. So she has been a very valuable resource for us, just like everyone else at OCS. Josephine is responsible because we just did some modifications to the assignments. So Josephine is responsible for region 3, 8, and 9. We also don't have here Rosa. She's on vacation this week, but Rosa Chapman, many of you know her. She's been with OCS for a number of years, and Rosa is responsible for region 6, 7, and 10. As you notice that I haven't mentioned Margarita. Many of you know that Margarita has been with our office for many years, and she has decided to retire from federal service. So she is in the office holding down our fort at this point. But congratulations from all of us to Margarita, because she has been with the federal service for about 30 years, I guess. With that, I would like to turn it over to Lauren to cover the rest of the morning's agenda, and then I'll come back at some point, talk about some of the specific stuff as far as LAHIP is concerned. Thank you.
And just, I think when you were mentioning Josephine, I think she handles Region 2, right? 2.
She is right now Region 2.
Right, okay. And Kate is handling Region 3, right?
Yes.
Okay, right. So we're all still trying to get adjusted to the new assignments. We just say, who's handling this region now? Please speak up. One more announcement on our staffing situation. As you probably know, we have been without a policy and evaluation branch chief for about 4 years now, since Charlotte Abney retired. And so that branch chief works with Yulia, Peter, Leon, and Katina Lawson, who's also holding down the fort in the office today, working mostly on our report to Congress, our home energy notebook, performance measures, data collection, all that good stuff. And so I understand, I haven't even had a chance to see it yet, but I understand that a vacancy announcement was posted yet again this past Monday, June 15th, and I believe it's open through July 10th. It's open to all sources, so you're all eligible to apply. Hint, hint, hint. We are looking for good people to come join our office and help administer LIHEAP at the federal level. So if you have any interest, the position is based in Washington, D.C. in the federal office, so it would require a relocation to there, but we definitely encourage you to, we'll send out an email with the link to the vacancy announcement. We encourage you all to consider it and share it with your colleagues. We really, really don't have anyone in mind for it. And we've had the worst luck trying to fill that position. So please, please take a look at it and give it serious thought. And with that, we'll now turn to the first session, which is on grantee roles and responsibilities. And so we're just going to tag team this session. And talk about what is LIHEAP. So we're going to talk a little bit about the background of the program. Again, this is more kind of a refresher 101, and talk a little bit about, because this is a block grant, what does that mean in terms of what are the federal rules versus where is that big gray area where each grantee can choose for him or herself how they're going to run the program in their area to meet your own local needs. So we'll talk a little bit about that distinction. So, as you all know, LIHEAP is a federally funded program that helps low-income households afford their heating, cooling, and potentially weatherization bills. There is a requirement that a reasonable amount of funds be set aside for crisis assistance, and so there are considerations that each of you have to make regarding what is a crisis and how you're going to address those crises within a certain time frame. The federal rules require that LIHEAP funding will only be given directly to state governments, territory governments, or federally or state recognized tribes. And as probably a lot of you are aware, we have over 200 directly funded LIHEAP grantees, of which over 150 are tribal grantees. And so really, all of you represent quite a wide variety of populations that you serve, but also the number of people you serve. I think one of our smallest grant amounts is maybe around $4,000 a year to serve a small number of households, and then some of our largest grantees may be getting a few $100 million. So depending on how large the population is. So there's quite a breadth of experience there. There is a federal rule regarding the eligibility for households to receive LIHEAP assistance, and that is the greater of 150% of the federal poverty levels, which our Department of Health and Human Services publishes every year, usually around January, and then we send out a notice about that. Or 60% of your state median income, SMI. And so it's the greater of. So sometimes when you look at a grantee's LIHEAP plan, you may see, well, their eligibility seems to be the equivalent of 200% or more of federal poverty. How is that allowable? And so what we do is we have a chart that translates what is 60% of SMI for that area, and as long as that equivalent on the federal poverty level is within that, that's okay. So it's the greater of the two. But then that means each of you has to decide, okay, where are you going to set it within that cap? There is a floor, which is it can't be lower than 110% of federal poverty. And I believe we just had a Federal Register notice published, right, on the state median income calculations. And so we have that link on our website, and I believe we sent out an email last week about it. If you haven't seen that, please contact your liaison or someone from our office, and we can share that with you. And we'll talk later on about resources that are online for all of you. And certainly one of the key resources I will keep reminding you of is our own LIHEAP website, because that is where we publish all of our guidance, all of our Dear Colleague letters, our information memoranda, and our action transmittals, which we email to you, also get published there. And we try to keep them there for as long as we can, so you can go back and research them. So this is a graphic that is showing just, again, looking at the states, the wide variety in whether they're using federal poverty or SMI and where that falls. The green bar is showing you where 150% of federal poverty is, and the top line there. And the red line is showing you where 100% of FPL is, so you can get a comparison. So you can see there's a broad variety, and the SMI is much higher in some states than 150% of federal poverty, and in some cases lower. So something for you to take into consideration when you're setting your eligibility levels each year. So there's also a provision in the federal rules about categorical eligibility. We held a webinar on this topic this spring, and hopefully a good number of you got to listen in on that, and hopefully it clarified things a bit. But what does this mean? It means that each of you have the choice to rely on the eligibility determination made by another agency for the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, what we usually call food stamps, the Supplemental Security Income, or SSI program through Social Security, or certain means-tested veterans programs, and we've tried to list the legal citations here for you so you can figure out which ones exactly would qualify. So it's your choice. You can rely on one or all of these different programs for the eligibility determination, and what that means is the household already applied for one of those other programs. They provided all of their income documentation to that office. It was presumably verified by that office, and they determined, yes, they qualify for SNAP or TANF. And by virtue of that, you're saying, okay, because you have been deemed qualified for that program, we will automatically deem you qualified for LIHEAP as well. As we'll talk about in a minute, that's not the end of your decision. You still have to decide, okay, if they're eligible, how much LIHEAP do they actually get? But at least this reduces some of the administrative burden in deciding, are they even eligible for LIHEAP? So Assurance 5 from the federal statute requires that the highest level of LIHEAP assistance go to those households with the lowest incomes and who have the greatest home energy cost or need, taking into account the household size. And so this is where you'll hear us often say your payment matrix has to be based on at least 3 criteria: household size, household income, and at least one factor relating to home energy cost or need. And as some of you will hear about later on, that could be really your choice. It could be the geographic location within your state or reservation. It could be the dwelling type, if it's a single-family home versus an apartment. It could be the fuel type, which is one of the more common ones we see. It could even be the presence of a vulnerable member, like an elderly person or a young child, disabled member. So that's up to you how you want to vary that third criteria. And we always try to emphasize we are part of the Health and Human Services family, so we always try to remind people of the connection between home energy and a household's health and safety. In prior years, we've had some funding for some optional programs that are only open to LIHEAP grantees. They're called REACH, the Residential Energy Assistance Challenge Program, which is basically a pilot program so that grantees can test different strategies for trying to reduce a household's home energy burden and improve their health and safety as it relates to home energy. And there's also the Leveraging Incentive Program, which basically provides an additional grant to those LIHEAP grantees that claim non-federal resources that they've coordinated with their LIHEAP program. So if you are using some utility ratepayer funds or state funds, tribe funds, there are a wide variety of resources that you can count towards leveraging and submit a report and get some additional money from us for that. Unfortunately, we've not had funding for those 2 programs for the last few years, but we are hopeful that we will in the future. So now we're just going to do a brief recap of the history of LIHEAP, and I think I'll turn to Akam for that part. After that? Okay, I'll do it. So I'm really going to breeze through this because it's really more for your interest, not so much your daily reference, but as probably some of you may be aware, the program really predated 1980 and was focused on crisis and weatherization. There were funding through Department of Energy. Really, 1981, the early 80s is where we became the block grant. This gives you a little background about why we sometimes refer to an old formula and a new formula for the funding for LIHEAP, which Peter can wax eloquently about, and I encourage you to talk to him one-on-one if you get a chance. But so the original formula in the block grant statute basically prescribed a formula for LIHEAP based on certain criteria. That remains part of how we allocate the money each year. Those data do not change from year to year. Basically, the calculations that were done originally is what we still use for that portion of the formula. And then a little later on in the 80s, they developed the new formula, which does change from year to year, where we're actually updating for each of your areas data relating to fuel prices, income-eligible populations, heating degree days and cooling degree days, and that gets updated each year based on some averages of data from census and other places. So it's fairly involved. I can't go into it all right now, but just know that when we reference old formula, new formula, it's really kind of going back to the early 80s, and as Congress was kind of sorting through creating this block grant and fleshing it out. And so, as some of you may be aware, I'll just also note that our statute technically has been unauthorized. The authorization lapsed several years ago. And so we continue to operate each year through the annual appropriation that Congress gives us. And when Congress does that appropriation, usually it starts off through what we call a continuing resolution or a temporary budget, because usually we don't have a final budget at the start of the federal fiscal year on October 1. They will usually put language in there that might change our last statutory language. And so for the last few years, some additional language they've been adding into the appropriation has related to the funding distribution. And they've been telling us, here's a fixed number of how much money should be run through the new formula, and then the rest should be run through the old formula. So for those of you who really like to follow the dollars and how they're derived, that's an important key to understanding why your funding amount may change from year to year, even if we're overall at a flat level. So from the earlier iteration of LIHEAP to the current program, the major difference is that it's a block grant going to all the governments, and the eligibility levels. I don't think we need to spend much time on all this. So I think let's just move on to what is a block grant. And is this your part? Okay, I'm going to turn to ACOM now.
Okay, as Lauren mentioned, the block grant, the major difference between block grant and any other federal grant is that it's, first of all, the key difference among the other grants is that it is allocated based on a formula. And Lauren explained how the formula works. The key point here is that even though the funding level at the national level stays the same, you could see a difference in your allocation from one year to another year because of those formulas being in the play. The other thing which I really liked when I was at the state level is the flexibility of the block grant, which means that grantees, state, tribes, or territories, they are allowed to design their own program within those very broad federal parameters. So if you're writing your state plan, if you're writing your LIHEAP plan, writing your policies, you can actually design your own program. That's one of the beauty of block grant program. Of course, you have to be mindful about some of those requirements that we have in place. The other thing is the funding. Who is eligible for LIHEAP funding from our office? Of course, it's all the states, tribal grantees, as well as territories of within U.S. So, of course, grantees can subcontract with their local entities, such as community action agencies or local service providers, city governments, but they are your subcontractors. They are not a direct grantee for us. Tribes, there are many tribes. I believe about 151 tribes are receiving LIHEAP grants from us for this year, direct grants. There are some exceptions to it. There are some tribes who are receiving their funding from the state. So if you are one of those states, you will notice that your allocation will include that amount that they're supposed to receive directly from the state. Okay. It's right on the screen. I was going to just quiz you how many assurances there are. There are 16, of course, there are 16 assurances starting from fund management to mission serving the low-income population, providing certification every year by your chief executive officer. So assurance 16, for example, it defines how you can help low-income people reduce their energy burden. You can provide them with energy education, things like that. Fund management, assurance 10, 9, and all these different kinds of assurances. And the cheat sheet here is that if you are new, people who have been around with LAHIP for years, you know this, the cheat sheet is your LAHIP application because your chief executive officer must certify on the LAHIP application that your entity or your state or your tribe will comply with those 16 assurances. So it's in the block grant format in the application. So assurance 1 through 16 all are spelled out on your LAHIP application. And that's what your chief executive is certifying every year when they submit an application to us. Okay. I just mentioned the plan. So each grantee is required to develop a specific definition, policy, and procedure. And there can be some overlap between your LAHIP plan and your policy manual. I have seen people, submitting their LAHIP plan and then also come up with a very detailed policies and procedure manual that will have some of those components that are already in the state plan. Or, your policy manual could be a broad policy manual with many attachments, other documents that are actually incorporated in the policy manual. But again, grantees are responsible for developing their own policies and procedures and definitions. As you know that in many areas, the federal government is silent on defining certain things, and we rely on our grantees to define those areas. For example, obligation is a big one that people ask us many questions about obligation and expenditures. The very first question we ask them of is that how you define obligation, because that's what you should be doing that. This is also very, very important. I think it's a key point, is that these federal rules are subject to interpretation, and we rely on our grantees to interpret them unless they are clearly erroneous. So please try to remember that, especially if you're new, that if there are any requirements, we would rely on you to interpret that for your subgrantees, for your state, for your tribes, unless they are clearly erroneous. And if we notice that, of course, we'll point that out during state plan development, monitoring process, whatnot. But once again, I think it's a very important and interesting feature of the LAHIP block grant. Fund allocation. You want me to do that? Okay. Funds. So as Lauren mentioned, the LAHIP grant actually is a huge spread. I think this year, the lowest amount of grant one grantee received was $4,000, and it can go up to several $1 million. We are responsible for managing, for this year, $3.4 billion in LAHIP block grant. So as you can see that it's a huge task. So, and that's where it comes, this whole partnership concept, that I don't believe that our office would be able to effectively manage these funds unless we have cooperation and partnership with each and all of you. So that is very important. And cooperation on defining your own definitions, making sure that all the federal rules and regulations are followed, making sure that fund allocation requirements are met. So in many cases, you'll be, especially for new directors, you'd be working very closely with your fiscal counterpart on making sure that funds are managed properly, and if there's any problem, just bring it up to our attention and we can try to clarify things for you. Admin cost. Again, We rely on our grantees to define administrative costs. There is a memo on our website that talks a little bit about the administrative cost. However, straightforward, there is a 10% cap on administrative use of LAHI funds for administrative purposes. So for example, if you have a cost allocation plan that funds staffing, if you have an indirect rate, if you have other kind of definition of administrative cost, the bottom line is that you cannot exceed 10% of your total allocation. The other caveat here is that it's on the assurance, I believe, that the 10% cap allows to other federal funding. So for example, if you are receiving LAHIP and you're also receiving CSBG and other federal funds, when we monitor our grantees, we just make sure that the 10% cap is not exceeded. That doesn't mean that you cannot fund your administrative cost from other sources, for example, state sources. I know that many states, they receive additional funds from legislative appropriation, budget process, whatnot. You might have some other state funds available. So if you need additional funds, I think it's okay for states to use additional funds as long as those are not coming from federal source. So 10%. Okay, the next one is, it sounds like I'm just talking about all the caps here. 15%, weatherization. Many of you run DOE-funded weatherization program as well as LAHI-funded weatherization program, or just LAHI-funded weatherization program. As a grantee, you're allowed to allocate 15% of your total LAHIP allocation towards weatherization activities. And again, it's up to you to define and design a program that serves your low-income population's need. It can be just straightforward weatherization. I have seen in some states they use more LAHIP money for weatherization than DOE funds. Or it can be boiler replacement or HVAC system. It can be just geared toward an emergency crisis program for weatherization, but it's up to you. And once again, if you choose to go that route, the initial cap is 15% of your allocation. That doesn't mean that you cannot exceed that. However, this is one of the few things where you need our prior approval. We call it weatherization waiver. If you'd like to go above your 15% cap, right now you can go up to 25%, but you would need our prior approval, and prior approval has to be in a written format. So you'd be sending information to us, working with your OCS staff to make sure that you have approval on going up to 25% or above, or 15%, exceeding the 15% cap. Let's put it that way. Okay, this is one of my favorite. When I was in Massachusetts, I always made sure that sub-grantees are aware of the 5% allocation for Assurance 16 activities. What it does, many of you know, but for the new folks, basically, again, you can take 5%, up to 5% of your allocation and use it for what we call Assurance 16. And simply what it means is that energy education, case management, as you know, that there's been discussions about integrating LAHIP with other programs, case management, one-stop shopping. All these new buzzwords are out there. So if you'd like to introduce some of those case management concepts, helping folks become more energy self-sufficient, here's your allocation, the 5% for Assurance 16 activities. Carryover. This is one of the difficult areas. I still don't understand it very well, but I'll just give you the bottom line. The bottom line is that when you receive your LAHIP award letter, you will see there's a footnote there that says that you must obligate the 90% of your funding in the first year. So for example, let's take a state that this year the state received $5 million in LAHIP allocation. You must obligate 90% of their allocation for the first year, that year that you actually received the grant. And then you can carry over the 10%, which can be unobligated funds, to the following fiscal year, but you must expend that 10% in the following fiscal year. If you don't, then I think the grantee survey is the best way to report those funds to us. And if you exceed your cap, you'd be returning money to HHS. And of course, we don't encourage that. We would like you to continuously look at your obligation, your expenditures, to make sure that you are able to spend money as you designed your original program, and not to basically return funds to HHS. I don't know if that's the official position, but I think it it helps low-income folks if you can make sure that funds are not returned, of course. Again, that's wearing my state hat. Reserve reasonable amount for crisis assistance through March 15. There are different kinds of crisis programs out there. Some states use LIHEAP money for cooling crisis, heating crises, and then also I think only a handful of states, they have a program called Fast Track, where they process applications within 48 hours or 18 hours, whatnot, to make sure those applicants are served. However, regardless, grantees should set aside some funds. We're not dictating how much, but the word here is a reasonable amount, so that if there is any crisis, you are able to help them, and that crisis funds should be available for you to use up until March 15 of each year. And I know some states set aside $1 million, some states set aside $2 million, but again, it's up to you, depending on your need, how much you should set aside. Okay, direct assistance, cooling, heating, crisis, they are all direct assistance. Means the funds are going to low-income households. So once you go through the calculation, 10%, 15%, 5%, and your obligation versus carryover, any remaining funds must be used for benefit purposes. And it can be cooling, heating, depending on what kind of state you have, what you have written in your state plan. But again, this is the direct benefit funds for low-income folks. Okay, I think I covered that already, that all 16 assurances must be certified by your chief executive officer or a designee of the chief executive officer, and that must be done every year. The process you do that, of course, is through LIHEAP plan. Certification must be the state executive officer, tribal chief, chairperson, or his or her designee. You already know that, just in case. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Lauren now to talk about roles and responsibilities. Thank you.
Wow. So that slide that Akam was walking through on all those different caps, it may seem pretty straightforward, but there's actually a lot there that we're going to try to unpack in some of the sessions coming up today. One of our next sessions is about obligations, and that plays into all these different caps, particularly the 10% carryover. So again, that may seem pretty straightforward, but just know that most of the questions we get are about those issues on that slide. And just to reiterate, the 10% carryover, sometimes we get questions about, is it 1 year from the date of the award letter? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, it's regardless of how many distributions of funds or grant award letters you get from us within a federal fiscal year, it's within that federal fiscal year that you have to obligate the 90%. So this is why we are trying to get the funding out to you as early in the year as we can. We realize that when we're issuing award letters close to the fourth quarter for us, that makes it really difficult for all of you. But even if you get an award letter, say, like you might be getting within the next month or two on reallotment of 2014 funds, that money, 90%, needs to be obligated within this year by the end of September. 10% for use in the next year. Okay, so just moving along to roles and responsibilities. We were going to talk a little bit about what does this flexibility mean? There's so much gray area, and you heard Akam mention that Generally, we will defer to your interpretation of our rules unless we deem them clearly erroneous. And you're probably wondering, well, what do you mean by clearly erroneous? And we tell you, well, we're not sure until we see it. We're going to take it on a case-by-case basis because often we're going to have to talk to our legal staff and our grants management staff and get other input before we can give you a final decision. But I can tell you there have been very few cases where we've had to overturn a grantee's interpretation of our rules. One example where we did that was about whether you could use weatherization funds for replacing an entire roof. And we decided that was not a reasonable interpretation of a low-cost weatherization measure. It'd be okay to repair a section if that's necessary for the home energy of that unit, but not to replace the entire roof. We also decided handicap ramp installation was not a reasonable interpretation of weatherization funds. So there might be other federal sources of funding available for that, but not LIHEAP. So getting back to the responsibilities, again, we give the funding to you. We are holding each of you accountable for how you're implementing these 16 assurances and the rest of the statute and regulations. So that's a large responsibility. Some of that responsibility you're welcome to delegate out. And so I think pretty much most tribes retain that responsibility centrally, but we do have a good number of state grantees that will subgrant or subcontract to other entities to become local administering agencies. And so they will delegate some responsibilities for, say, eligibility or benefit determinations to those agencies, which may be community action agencies, local governments, county governments, other nonprofits, what have you. And that's fine. But there are some responsibilities that we feel should really be kept vested with the state, tribe, or territory as the prime grantee. And there are certain expectations that we have for each of you in how we interact. And so here's just a big list of what we're hoping to be able to work with you on. Obviously, we want to have open communication. We very much see our relationship with you as a partnership. We are all working as a team together for the best stewardship of this funds as possible. And so we want you to feel like you can reach out to us, you can confide in us. If you're running into a problem with a sub-grantee or something else, that you can talk with us openly about that and not feel like we're going to, that there are going to be negative repercussions because of that. Obviously, as Aiken pointed out, there's a lot that our rules don't say. There are a lot of definitions that we don't provide. We don't really tell you how you have to do things. We tell you what we're going to hold you accountable for, right? That you don't spend more than 10% for admin. But how you track whether you're staying within that 10% cap, we really leave up to you. And we just want to make sure that if we come in to monitor or one of your independent auditors comes in, that they can easily retrace your accounting so that they can confirm also, yeah, you stayed within that cap. And we're going to go into each of these in more detail, so let me just, I guess, move on. So communication. Please reach out to us if you are leaving. That sounds really basic, but I can't tell you how often we will send an email out and we get a bounce back that it's undeliverable, and then we try to call and we find out the person retired or moved on to another position. So please, if you are leaving, let us know. We don't want to keep sending messages to the wrong person, and we will wish you well in your next endeavor. And then when a replacement is found, let us know who that is so that we can make sure the communications from our office are reaching your office in a timely manner. And that we can also schedule a one-on-one training. We can do that by phone, webinar. If you happen to be in the area, if we're going to be in your area, we can set up a one-on-one. We really want to make sure that you have adequate time to talk with us. If anything changes, if your office moves, like our office is going to move later this year, we're just moving a few blocks down, but our official address will change. Let us know. We need to notify our grants management office. Some of you may have talked with Lydia Peel, our grants management officer, who's actually the one cutting the award letters to all of you. If there's a change to your DUNS number, other important information that we'll need for the grant award letter, please let us know so we can make sure that gets corrected timely. If you're going to be out for an extended period of time, if you're going to be on sick leave, annual leave, if there's a cultural event, a big powwow or something going on where really we can't reach anyone in your office for a week or longer, please just let us know so that we'll be aware of that. If there is an alternate contact, please provide that as well. That's particularly important for us between August and November when we're reviewing your plans, because we're going to start getting funding hopefully in early October, and we can't release that funding to you until we get to complete reviewing your plan. And if we have questions about your plan, we're not going to be able to release that funding till we get to reach you. So just please keep in contact with us. So we have a resource on our website and through our Light Heap Clearinghouse called the Tribal Manual, and we're actually in the process of updating that and trying to rename it to the Grantee Manual, because really there are very few distinctions in the rules between tribal programs and state programs and territory programs. But it's a really great resource that kind of walks you through all the different policy and procedural questions that you need to think about as a coordinator. But it doesn't answer everything, and it can't answer everything because we can't, again, define everything for you or require how you do things in each case. So that's where we're going to turn to you and say, okay, what manual have you developed to flesh out these definitions and policies and procedures? So some key things that we're looking for is, how do you define crisis? How is a regular crisis different from a life-threatening crisis? Because each has a different time frame within which it has to be responded to. What's your definition for administrative costs? As Eka mentioned, we have an information memorandum on our website from 2000 that talks about some of the flexibility you have in deciding what is charged to admin versus your regular program funding. And we've gotten requests over the last year from some grantees about updating that guidance. We've heard you. We're working on that. We had hoped to release it by now, but we're not quite there yet. But hopefully this summer we'll be releasing that. And we know a lot of you have questions about costs relating to IT systems and some other issues relating to admin. So if you want to talk about that, just see one of us. How do you define what an obligation is? Obviously, as Akam talked about, that's a key concept, because you may have to return funding to us if you haven't obligated it within a certain time. And so for you to be clear about what is a proper obligation, when does an obligation perhaps no longer become an obligation, and that may be the case if you're using sub-grantees, right? So if you're executing a contract with a local agency for $1 million, and you're saying they should use that money by next July, and then next August when you're doing a reconciliation, they say, whoops, we forgot we had $100,000 left, we'll give it back to you, state X. Well, unfortunately, you're in another federal fiscal year for us, so that may have implications for you about that money that's now unobligated, and we're still tracking it according to the original time. So Yulia is going to go into more detail about that shortly, but it's a really key concept. Expenditures. So what's the difference between when you've committed the money versus when you've actually paid it out? How does that impact your accounting procedures? How you're going to set benefits, what your eligibility limits are going to be. Fair hearing process and how you do outreach on your fair hearing process, how people know they can formally make a complaint or an inquiry if their application hasn't been decided on timely, or if they question whether it was the right benefit amount or anything else relating to that application. And of course, your monitoring, because we can't get out to all of you every year. And we certainly can't get out to all of your sub-grantees if you are using sub-grantees. So we're relying on all of you to have a process for monitoring yourselves and monitoring any partners with which you are sharing any of your Light Heap funds. And of course, any program integrity controls. So if you're using a system, we're going to look at what kind of features your system has for preventing duplicate payments and other problems. So you're also going to need to decide how you vary benefits. I mentioned earlier about the 3 factors, so I'll just kind of breeze through those again. The number of household members, the household income, and 1 factor relating to home energy cost or need. It is a requirement that every grantee get public participation on your plan before you submit it to us, because part of your plan is going to ask, what did you do for public participation? States are required to have a public hearing. Tribes are not, but you're certainly welcome to have one if you want to. Even if you have a hearing, there are certain other ways that you can get the word out about your plan. We know some grantees will have work groups or committees of different stakeholders in the community to get their feedback. You can certainly post notices in the community, in the papers and what have you. You can post it on your website. And really getting that input and then letting us know, okay, how much input did you get? And to what extent did you change your plan as a result of that input? Because what we're really looking for is a robust process where the community feels like they have forewarning about how the program is going to be run for the coming year, and they have some say in that, and that you've actually given it some meaningful consideration. And I think I just went through that slide. The plan. So the plan is your application for funding. It's due the same time every year, September 1. Why is it due September 1? Because that's what our statute says, but we can also presume that's because it gives us a little time to review it before we get the funding from Congress, hopefully in October. But again, we cannot issue funding until we get to review your plan and talk with you about your plan and make sure we feel that it addresses all the requirements in the federal statute that you need to discuss about how your program is going to be run. So if you're going to miss the September 1 deadline, that's okay if you contact us first, ideally in writing. You can put a remark in OLDC, our online data collection system, through the internet to let us know that you need a specific new deadline date. You can send your liaison an email, but something in writing before September 1. This is particularly important for tribes because our regulations require that if a tribe wants an extension of the September 1 deadline, that it's not just us that approves it, but it's the state within which your reservation is located because it impacts their funding. If you wind up not getting funding that year, then the money goes back to them. So that's why they need to weigh in on that. So we need to give time for both our office and their office to weigh in on that. We encourage you that if you need some extra time to try to keep that as close to September 1 as possible because, again, it's going to hold up us being able to get your funding to you. And, of course, for you to get it out to the households that really need it in time for winter. Negotiating agreements. So obviously with states and tribes, there's an opportunity. It's not a requirement, but we do encourage you to consider the possibility of entering into, ideally, a written agreement that you can share with our office that talks about how much of the state funding will go to the tribe for that year and flesh out any other coordination issues between the state program and the tribal program. And we'll talk more about this later this morning. Many of you also have agreements with your utilities and your energy vendors, and we really encourage this as well. There is an assurance in our statute that you're going to make sure that there are certain consumer protections that you have in place regarding vendors and that customers are getting proper notice of benefits being credited and all sorts of things. So it's really helpful to have that negotiated through an agreement. And there, again, we'll talk about this a little later on in more detail. If you're a state using local agencies, having those grants or contracts fully fleshed out so they understand what rules they have to be following that trickle down from the federal level, as well as any unique state rules should be incorporated into that agreement, like your definition of obligation. And agreements with any other agencies you might be sharing money with. For example, a lot of states will transfer money to the state agency that does the Department of Energy's weatherization assistance program so that they can also use the light heat money for weatherization. And that's fine, but we encourage you to have a written agreement about that and that you spell out in that agreement some of the requirements you have regarding the light heat money because it still impacts them. You still need to know how they're accounting for those funds, how many households are being served, and what have you. And then if you do have any other agreements with other state agencies, whether it's the TANF agency or perhaps even with the Federal Social Security Administration for data exchanges, again, those are helpful for the state or the prime grantee to be negotiating. Setting your monitoring protocol. And so it's really important when it comes to monitoring that there's no appearance of a conflict of interest. right? So, you know, some states will contract out to an independent entity to do monitoring of their local agencies. That's fine. But obviously, you don't want the local agencies monitoring themselves or an association to which they belong monitoring them, because there's a apparent conflict of interest there. So establishing what the criteria are that are going to be monitored, the schedule, the protocol, establishing any expectations for what your staff, their staff are going to follow in terms of how they do their work, separation of duties, especially on the fiscal side. And making sure you have adequate staff. And I know this is, you know, I'm sure plenty of you are laughing or chuckling at me like, yeah, well, if I had more admin money, I'd have adequate staff. But making sure that you can make that case, that you can really demonstrate the workload of each person and what they're doing, so that you are not stretched too thin, and we can certainly empathize with you there. And again, making sure you have a process for communicating your rules, the changes in your policies, and doing training for new staff each year. So again, like we are, just setting the expectations for any partners you're working with. And again, overseeing program accountability. As you know, the last few years, there's been a renewed attention paid to program integrity, especially since the report came out a few years ago from our Government Accountability Office on strengthening internal controls and trying to prevent improper payments. And so we all are being asked to take a renewed look at that. And so just making sure that you have a regular review of the independent audits that are done, if that applies to your agency, and we'll be talking about that more on Friday, and making sure if there are findings through the audits or through your monitoring efforts, that there is a timely corrective action plan that's put in place that everyone is monitoring. Budget and allocation. So again, the grant award is going to each of you as our prime grantee. Only you really have the ability to set the budget for your area, how you're going to distribute that, or if you're going to make any changes to that distribution throughout the year, as you're noticing that maybe some sub-grantees are using the money slower than other agencies, and you don't want to be left with unused money at the end of the year. Tracking those obligations and reconciliation is very important. Reporting to us, we have a variety of reports that are required each year, and most of which we will need to see before we release your funding for the next year, such as the household report and the carryover and reallotment report, which is usually due coming this summer. Those are very important tools for us to be able to see how the program is going. And of course, the plan through OLDC, requesting your extensions timely. And of course, drawing down funds. So only you have access to our federal payment management system to actually draw down funds as you need them. And just a quick reminder, please do not draw down the entire balance as soon as we award it to you. There is a federal law, the Cash Management Improvement Act, that requires that funds be drawn down on a reasonable basis to meet your immediate needs. So as you're incurring those obligations, getting ready to pay out those particular expenditures, then you can be drawing down the money to cover that need. But the federal money should not be drawn down in a lump sum and be drawing interest for periods of time. That would be an audit finding. No commingling of funds. This is particularly something we see at subgrantees where they're responsible for doing intake for a lot of different programs, Head Start. And unfortunately, we've been seeing a fair number of cases where the LIHEAP money seems to become the slush fund for when they have not enough money to cover expenses in other areas. So just be aware that that sometimes happens, and it's something you really need to keep an eye on, because that's going to cause you some headache. And making sure you have an adequate system or process for tracking each line item and the timing properly. And the CAN is the accounting number with our payment management system or in your system. Refunds from vendors. So sometimes the vendors aren't able to provide the entire credit to a household. a household member may move or die or what have you, and so there are leftover money and you get it returned or your subgrantee gets it returned, they should be reporting that to you so that you can do a reconciliation of when that benefit was actually paid out from which federal fiscal year, so you can determine if you still have the right to re-obligate those funds or if you have to return them to us. So, Akam, you want to talk about what can be delegated? Because that's all what you have to do.
Okay. Application intake. You can delegate that to your subgrantees or some other type of organization. As Lauren mentioned, can be city government, it could be like another nonprofit like local administrating agency, or any other entities that you feel fit for that purposes. You don't have to do intake at your office. You can delegate that once again. Eligibility determinations, again, it comes hand to hand with application intake, application processing, but the key point here is that your manual should spell out how clients are made eligible so that that policy is consistently followed across your state or tribal entity or territory area, whatnot, to make sure that they are all following the same eligibility determination process and standards that are spelled out in your manual. Benefit determination, once again, it's kind of a 50-50 as I see it. For example, states and tribes should set their benefit policies or benefit matrix based on those three criteria, as Lauren mentioned. However, a local entity can decide how that benefit structure should be applied to an individual household based on their income, energy cost, as well as family size. So once again, benefit determinations can be delegated. Benefit payments, of course, that goes hand to hand. So once these entities determine benefit level, they are allowed to make benefit payments, and how, when, and how often payments should be made, how payments should be processed. Once again, those should be all spelled out in your policy manual. Outreach, of course, a state or a tribal grantee, sometimes it's not possible for them to do all kinds of outreach throughout the area. So once again, I believe it's a good idea to use your network, a subgrantee network, to reach out to these low-income folks, especially people who are vulnerable, people who are having emergency situations. So once again, outreach process and can be delegated. Independent audits, of course, you can hire outside independent auditors, auditing firm to conduct an audit of your LAHI funds, as well as subgrantees can do that. So it's a very important responsibility, but it can be delegated. Fair hearing determinations, which is the appeal process. So what we are seeing during the last few monitoring visits that I have been part of is that grantees must spell out their fair hearing process. But it doesn't mean that all hearing must happen at the state level or at the central office. It can be delegated. For example, I'll give you one best practice example. The client receives LAHIP, applies for LAHIP assistance. They are denied because of many reasons. Their first stop ideally should be at the subgrantee level, and then it kind of progressively goes up. So if the client is still not happy, client can come to the state, and there could be another level, and ultimately I think the client is allowed to come to HHS if they're still not happy. So as you can see, this is some kind of a progressively, higher authority built in, but it can be delegated at the local level. Data verification, we have been talking about data for the last few years, LAHI performance measures, grantee survey, carryover reports. But as you know that if you have delegated your LAHI program to the local level, you must have a data verification, data collection process in place, and therefore it is also very important that you delegate that responsibility to some extent to those networks. So for example, a CAP agency is serving LAHIP customers. They should be able to track, verify data, and report to you. And then, of course, that report comes to us in a different format. But it is a very important responsibility, in my opinion, that can be delegated, and oftentimes it works well if you think it data verification as a whole network rather than just isolated events of data verification. Systems development. Of course, system development and data verification these days go hand to hand. We are not, you call those paper system or pebble system. Some people know that. We're not doing that anymore. So in this day and age, we all using computer. Therefore, there is a greater need of having systems in place. And by systems, I mean hardware, software, whatnot. Those systems can help, can cut down staff time, can also make your program more efficient. So system development can be delegated to a software company or an outside entity to a local agency. But again, what I learned from LAHIP all these years, that consistency is very, very important. If data verification is delegated, system development is delegated, just make sure that it's consistent. It kind of talks to each other, and then also there is a seamless way of collecting and verifying data from the client level all the way to HHS level. Resources. Ron, you want to do that? Okay. So we're going to get into the communication in a minute, but I just wanted to show you what resources are available. First of all, our website. It has tons of information, and believe me, I've been with OCS for 6 months. I have not finished reading all the materials that we have in the LAHIP website. It is so resourceful. Not only that, I think I noticed lately that we have been getting approvals on different IMs and ATs and Dear Colleagues. Those are also posted on our website. Of course, you get an email through our listserv, but for some reason, if you're not able to read that posting, I would encourage you to go to our website on a regular basis just to make sure, refresh yourself what's been posted. There are, of course, many other ways you can communicate with us, and we can communicate with you. Your LAHIP OCS staff I see it as your first line of communication. Of course, that doesn't mean that you should not contact me or Lauren or any other staff member, but if it's a LAHIP specific, like a state plan specific question or a report specific question, I would encourage you to start that communication with our staff. Of course, you can email us. You can have in-person. We have in-person meetings. We are doing this today. Oftentimes, we have one-to-one meetings when we visit your area, like a monitoring site visit. We can have in-person meetings. There are many ways we can communicate with each other. So the important thing is, key point here is that I have all the staff names and the information there. It's also posted on our website. So feel free to contact any of us. Okay. I was talking about communication before, is that there are, of course, you all know this, the communication is a two-way business. So there are requirements that are in place, and that you communicate with us through state planning process, through reporting process, but we also communicate with you. I don't know if you noticed that, through training and technical assistance. We have grantee training meetings, like we are having one this year, and as Lauren mentioned, next year we're alternating. So next year we'll have regional meetings. We have work groups. Many of the work group members are here from Performance Measure Implementation Work Group, and also there was another work group that I was part of in the past, is Program Integrity Work Group, and many of you are in this room. So I just wanted to give a good hand to all of you, because these work groups has been very valuable to all of us, and they are continuously working. We are learning. So here's my shout out to all the group members who are here. Presentation at annual conferences. NUAC is a very good example that every year OCS staff has been going to NUAC conference, which is happening here in Baltimore next week. There will be several sessions about LAHIP, not only from our office, but also, that utility companies, Many of you are presenters in those sessions. So there's another way the LAHIP TNTA happens, going beyond OCS. Action transmittal, I already mentioned that IAM's Dear Colleague letters, those are being posted on a regular basis. Lauren announced this morning about the state plan IAM that should go out, probably has gone out already, probably this morning, this afternoon, and it will be posted on our website. There are many forthcoming IAMs and Dear Colleagues from our office, and I always encourage you to read those. Discussion during on-site monitoring and TNTA visit. Some of you who have been visited this year and also in the past, as you know, that our approach is to have a dialogue with you. We're not out there to just pinpoint problem. As I tell my staff that compliance is compliance. What it means that if there is a compliance issue, we'll discuss it, no matter in what format. But the most important thing is that the best practice examples that we, during these meetings, we learn about your program. We learn about what's working well for you so that when we come back to our office and our staff can communicate some of those best practice examples with other states, with other tribes, we can pair up folks. But before you do that, of course, we need to have the information, and this is how we gather information about best practices and about things that are going really well at the local level. Regional conference call, this is something new that we're trying out this year. Many of you, thank you so much for folks who have been part of our couple of conference calls that we had. I think there's one last week, and then a few weeks ago we had one. So basically what Lauren and I, we're trying to do this year, starting this year, is to have at least 4 regional calls during the year with our grantees, and we'll invite you in a group regional calls. Basically, it has 2 goals. One is to communicate OCS expectations, OCS announcements with you, and also the other important part, the important goal is to hear from you how things are going. If you have any questions for us, that can be discussed in a group setting. That doesn't mean that you should not write an email as an individual grantee or call us to ask something specific about your state or about your tribe, but we would like to have this communication going, and hopefully with your participation, we'll be doing more and more regional calls. And webinars, of course, many of you have participated in a webinar last week. We have been doing many webinars on specific topics. Many are forthcoming. So when you see an email from us or an invitation from us, I encourage all of you to be part of those webinars because those are topic specific, and I personally find them very, very useful. Okay, Lauren, you want to cover that? I think we are pretty much done. So I'll just mention one other thing before I hand it over to Lauren for closing remarks. TNTA contractor. As Lauren mentioned, and all of you know that for the last few years, we have been, as a network, very fortunate to receive $3 million as part of our LAHIP allocation, that's specifically for training and technical assistance. And we're using part of that funds for conducting our monitoring, but the bulk of it is actually being used to provide training and technical assistance to our grantees. And we have this year, we have one contractor, the Brilliant team, and many of you have talked to them, and this is an ongoing process, and Yulia is leading that effort. So what we would like to do going forward with you is that if you have identified any training or technical assistance need, let us know. We will find the best option for you. And Brilliant team is a very resourceful team, as I'm learning. They will be able to help you and bring trainers on site to your agency or to your state to provide support. And this will include peer-to-peer assistance network, which means I mentioned the buddy network, which means that one state is helping a tribe or one tribe is helping another tribe, whatnot. On-site technical assistance visit, I already mentioned that Brilliant team can go on-site and provide you with TNTA. We have done one TNTA visit already. There's one forthcoming next week. And once again, the webinars, and Brilliant team is also helping us with the webinars for all of you. Okay, online resources. Lauren, I would like to hand it over to you to make some closing remarks.
Sure. I think, we've all these presentations were sent out in advance, so hopefully you all have a copy or have it electronically so you can come to these slides at your leisure and check all these resources out. And just FYI, for the on-site TNTA visits, a lot of those have been in follow-up to the monitoring visits that we're doing. And so you may be contacted either by someone from Brilliant or their subcontractor, Engaging Solutions, who will try to talk with you about what they can come out and work with you on. We're going to have lots of opportunities throughout the day to answer questions, and we're going to have a general Q&A at the end of the day.